As I mentioned earlier, today is the day that Scott Johnson from the Wenatchee Rescue Mission was scheduled to join us and share his story. Scott contacted me on Wednesday morning and let me know that he and his wife were sick with a terrible viral infection, not COVID, and they had lost their voices. So they were unable to speak today. Wanted to give me time to come up with plan B. I think this ironic turn of events has provided me some important life lessons. One of them, no matter how much you plan, you never know what a new day will bring. The other, it was heart-stopping for me as a lay leader, and I'm pretty sure there's folks here in the audience that are in the congregation that know what I'm going to say. Worship leaders should always have one or two service scripts on hand to ensure that they're not left with a blank script as they take the pulpit on Sunday morning. Nonetheless, here we are. I invite you to sit back in your seat and embrace this morning's alternate service. What does it mean to belong? According to author, psychosocial rehabilitation specialist, and educator, Kendra Cherry, need to belong, also known as belongingness, refers to a human emotional need to affiliate with and be accepted by members of a group. Sense of belonging involves more than simply being acquainted with other people. Is centered around gaining acceptance, attention, and support from members of the group, as well as providing the same attention to other members. I have a friend, and this morning we're gonna refer to him as Max to protect his anonymity. Max moved to this valley about 5 years ago from the west side. He's been houseless since his arrival. And he chose to come here because he had family living nearby. Though his family doesn't acknowledge him as if he didn't exist. Max is about 67 years old and the kindest, I can't even stress, the kindest, most gentle soul, sorrowful blue eyes. And I met him, his days were where he had paid $10 a night for his bed and to store his meager belongings. Walked down to Lighthouse Christian Ministries for breakfast and other meals of the day. And between meals, he'd walk up time to pass the day away and to be sheltered when weather was inclement. Max drifted silently down the streets between these three establishments on a daily basis. Just like Isabel in our story, as pale and thin as the wind, he is invisible to society. I met Max when he was having some health issues. We have mutual friends who love him dearly. I actually say I love him dearly too. He's my friend. Group where he is accepted and has a sense of belongingness. He'd occasionally complain to his friends that his feet hurt from so much walking. Then the pain from his diabetic neuropathy started migrating up his legs. That's when they called me. Deb tries to fix everything. Many of you who know me know that. So they called me to come talk with Max in hopes that I could suggest some services that might help their friend. I think what struck me then when I visited with Max, and still sticks with me today, is Max's strong sense of pride and the insistence that he didn't want to bother anybody for help. Yet this gentle soul needed the help of doctors, social workers, and other service providers because his lifestyle, mere act of surviving on his days on the streets, out of house, was killing him. While he has not yet been a frequent flyer of the healthcare system, I knew it was only a matter of time before he would be. I think we can all agree that homelessness, or the more humanizing term that I'm trying to use, houselessness, is on the rise. I want to note that I'm making a conscious effort to retrain my brain to use the term houseless or houselessness instead of homeless or homelessness. When I'm questioned about this shift in my terminology, I turn to Lily Capstick's blog post, Rethinking Homelessness, Houseless People in the US, in which she writes, when it comes to rethinking our national or global issues, it's important to reconsider the language we use to describe the people involved. According to various activists, most humanizing language to describe people without housing is houseless or unhoused instead of homeless. The term homeless can also help to restore a sense of dignity to people struggling with housing. On February 24th of this year, Chelan County and 15 nonprofit partners conducted the annual point in time count at Link Transit's Columbia Station. The event allowed housing service providers and other service-based nonprofits a chance to communicate directly with people in need of their services and to provide resources, including backpacks, sleeping bags, coats, gloves, socks, hand warmers, food, and more to those in need who participated in the survey. You can find the full article published of the published results from the count in the March 15th edition of the Wenatchee World. Here are some highlights that I think are worth mentioning this morning. Count found 398 individuals total. 275 of them were sheltered and 123 were unsheltered. The unsheltered, 70 people were living outdoors or in a tent. 36 were living in a vehicle, and 17 were living in an RV. The individuals who were sheltered, 123 were in transitional housing, 12 were in a hotel, and the rest were in emergency shelters. Asha Slayman, who is the new housing program coordinator for Chelan County, says, we need to get to the bottom of why, because we're spending as a state and as a county a ton of money to get people off the streets and into shelters. Is it the shelter's problem? There's something that the shelter isn't accommodating, about the shelter that isn't accommodating or welcoming? Or is it the human being that doesn't want to go? Or is it the human being that doesn't know that there's availability? Some people, though, Slayman says, the shelter is never going to be the right fit due to many things like mental illness and behavioral issues or having a household with children. And then there are people who just don't want to go. I spoke with Sasha on the phone this week. We had a long conversation about the traditionally high barriers the local shelters have, which hinder some people, some unhoused folks from getting the critical shelter that they need. She also points that shelters in churches or shelters with words like gospel or mission can be subtle barriers to individuals with history of religious trauma. My friend Max was actually very comfortable at the Gospel House. He had been clean and sober for many years, which allowed him to stay night after night for a small fee and to keep his 3 meager bags of possessions safe each day. I had connected Max with a homeless outreach peer specialist from Catholic Charities who has been working with Max for over a year now and slowly helping him get connected to the services he needs and is working diligently to find him permanent supportive housing. Anna works hard to help Max, but the process to place people in housing in this valley makes it nearly impossible to achieve the goal of housing an individual, particularly for older single males, adult males. The current wait list for housing in the valley is around 310 human souls on an Excel spreadsheet waiting for housing. Now there's many factors. A lot of it has to do with our lack of inventory of housing for folks, but there are many factors, and nonetheless, there's 310 people on the list. One day last fall, Max got kicked out. Those are his words from the Gospel House. It's really unclear to me as to why he got kicked out after being there for 4+ years. His friend said he was told he'd been there too long. Our hearts sank. He feared that putting Max out on the streets as the winter was arriving in this valley was a death sentence for a 67-year-old untreated diabetic with severe neuropathy in his feet. Life as he had been accustomed to over the last few years abruptly changed. Anna talked with Max about moving into the hospitality house, which is now called the Wenatchee Rescue Mission, but he adamantly refused, adamantly. Prior to sleeping at the Gospel House, Max had stayed at the hospitality house and struggled to meet the high expectations of the facility. While I know several people who have supported the hospitality house in the past, including members of our fellowship, it is my understanding that the high barriers for the residents, which included adherence to fierce Christian doctrine, clean and sober, those types of rules and barriers, prevented a mutually supporting relationship between our fellowship and the hospitality house. And I also want to stress, because I know a lot of us support the Powerhouse Ministries, which is different than the Hospitality House. Hospitality House is an actual shelter. Powerhouse Ministries is a day shelter for individuals. And many of our members do support it. And we've actually done Thanksgiving dinner at Powerhouse. So please don't confuse the two. As we heard in this morning's wisdom, Phyllis Koldai and her co-author James Murray went out on the street to be compassionate presence to the people they met there. In an interview in the Hutchison Leader, Koldai said, "We discovered we needed the compassion of other people to survive." It was a very pivotal event in our lives. The book is a window for people who have a home to look for and see what it is like for someone who doesn't have a home. She admitted that it took years of counseling to get over her experience. She suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder and can't go into enclosed spaces. She also has panic attacks. Says, "I tried to be as present as I could and let go and appreciate the little things. When you're suffering, if you're suffering by choice, even if you're suffering by choice, little things matter and cut you deeply, or they can lift you up mightily." It is not uncommon for someone who has a home and is working to point to a homeless person and say something such as, all they need to do is pull themselves up by their bootstraps. There's nobody who pulls themselves up by their own bootstraps, she said. We need a lot of help. We forget that part. We left our home in the suburbs. We looked scruffy. We didn't intentionally try and make ourselves scruffy. After a couple blocks, someone yelled at us to get a job. Judgment was right there in our face. I met Scott Johnson one chilly morning this past February. We were both attending the Health and Safety Focus Group meeting for the local proposed low barrier emergency sleep center. For me, it was my first work group meeting in person in over 2 years, and I was thrilled to interact with other people again. That 1 hour interactive meeting, I got a strong sense I was going to actually like this guy, regardless of the assumptions of my assumptions of the agency he was representing. The facility I knew only as the hospitality house. As I reflect back, I recognize my assumptions were judgments I have made that were based on hearsay and my own resistance to fierce Christian doctrine. I had to reconcile my own conflicts in my head. I had not been there. Hospitality house, I just judged it without going in. Scott openly shares about his calling to serve the houseless. Well, he can certainly tell his story better than I listened to his very broken voice the other day and took some notes about his story. So I will paraphrase some of the points that he shared with me the other day. At the time of his calling, he was working for the Fortune 500 company Disney. Who doesn't love Disney? One day out of the blue, he tells of hearing God's calling. He was at work standing on Main Street, USA, looking at Sleeping Beauty's castle. Also tells me the story of working in West Hollywood with gay youth who were kicked out of their Christian homes to live on the streets. God's philosophy is not praying for people, loving them where they are at. When I watch Scott interact with the residents at the Wenatchee Rescue Mission, I smile because an image of the bumper sticker, WWJD ? Is being demonstrated right in front of my eyes. My friend Max does currently have shelter. He's not living with the residents at the Wenatchee Rescue Mission, though I am sure today he would feel right at home and most especially a sense of belongingness. I see this in the eyes of the current residents when I go there, and I hear it in their stories. Sit and visit when I go with the guy named Joe. And Joe's 80. He was 80 last week, and he just always, have a seat right here. Do you got a minute? And then he just starts telling me stories that I'm whether they're true or not, I just listen, and it's awesome to be there. I see this in the eyes of the current residents, and I hear it in their stories. Scott has created an inclusive and welcoming home in the Valley for many vulnerable residents, and I'm so grateful to have become his friend. One last thing that I'll add that I think has just really struck me is the hospitality house was a men's only shelter. They have the Haven of Hope, which is the women's side, but it's primarily a men's shelter. When Scott came, there were 40 residents. Today, there are over 70 residents at the Wenatchee Rescue Mission, and it includes both sexes, men and women. There are two gay couples that live there, and there's a transgendered person that is choosing to live there. So it is very inclusive. I'll close with excerpts from the final days on the street in Ohio. Day 44, Thursday, April 1st, April Fool's Day. Grief, heavy in these last days. People that James and I have come to know a little and to care for here on the riverbank at Grub Street and other places. When will they make their way home? How? As if by agreement, we don't speak of this. In the same way, we don't speak anymore of going home early, even though there seems to be no real reason to stay for just a few more days. No reason but Easter itself. Stay on the streets for those who feel trapped here. Stay for those who can't leave. Day 46, Saturday, April 13, passing on. This morning, I feel much in common with certain elderly folks I know who, coming to the end of their lives, say they now understand a little better what's truly been theirs. not their money or property, not their personalities or talents or successes, not even their loved ones. All these have a place, but in the end, they're transitory. They don't survive. What's mattered most, these people say, and what will endure are the endowments of the heart, which across a lifetime, they've had endless opportunities to develop. Capacity for love and for giving themselves to another person. Another's suffering, for feeling another's suffering and doing something about it. Embracing change, even if it means a sacrifice. Rejoicing, exercising faith, making peace, having visions that are beautiful and just and true, and finding the courage to speak of them and to somehow try to give them flesh. Capacities such as these will survive because they belong to us all. Their powers we human beings possess in common, a shared plot of fertile land that mustn't lie fallow for long. I'll leave us with a question. I've slightly adapted it. It comes from the book Practicing Presence, which was the follow-up book that Phyllis Cole Dye wrote after The Emptiness of Our Hands. How do we as a fellowship extend hospitality to strangers, allowing them an honored place among us and honoring their inherent worth and dignity?